cycle engineering, and he's going to be presenting today's topic, maximizing the value of your CMMS. And many of you are likely familiar with Joel because has over 25 years experience in the maintenance field. He is currently the International Projects Director for LCE, but over the past 25 years, his expertise is really in the field of training, having trained more than 15,000 maintenance leaders in over 3,000 organizations around the globe. And as a matter of fact, Joel is joining us today from Saudi Arabia, and we really do appreciate him taking time out of his evening to make this presentation for you. Joel is recognized as an expert in training for maintenance professionals, and as a thought leader, he's authored several books on maintenance and reliability and frequently speaks at various conferences. So, Joel, are you on the line with me today?
I am, Rona.
And Joel, thanks so much for, again, for putting this together and taking some time out of your training schedule to speak to our listeners today. And you know, we've had quite a few registrants, so this topic is obviously hitting a chord. And maybe you can tell us a little bit, Joel, while people are logging in, why is this topic important? And, you know, through all your training, why is it that you chose to focus on this topic today?
There's a lot of companies talking about CMMSs, and, you know, with SAP in the mix, a lot of really big players, and I've had an objection since I could remember 1984 maybe, and the objection was that no one was really looking out for the people using the system and how they could use it to better take care of the equipment they take care of. So that's where this came from, is how we can do that.
Okay, great. Well, before we get started, Joel, just a couple of quick things for our listeners out there. I have all your phones on mute because we are recording today's session, and at the conclusion of the webinar, we will, or within the next day, we'll send you a link to the recorded version if you'd like to share it with others or go back through it. And also, Joel has been kind enough to share not only a PDF of his slide deck, but an article that goes into a little more depth on today's topic, because in our 45 minutes or so, we'll just be scratching the surface. Joel has also agreed to stay around till the top of the hour and answer any questions that you have. So please feel free to type your questions at any time into the questions feature on your GoToWebinar panel, and I'll read them to Joel at the conclusion of the webinar. And I'd like to extend a special welcome today. We're holding these a little bit earlier than normal, partly because Joel is overseas and partly because we have many guests joining us today and listeners from our UK office and all throughout Europe. And a nice shout out to someone who's listening from Alaska, and for all of our folks on the west coast of the United States. I know it's rather early, but we do appreciate you joining us. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Joel.
Thanks very much. Okay, we're going to unlock the secrets. And the secrets are, you notice if you look in the little chest, they're jewels. So just, we're really going to look for the jewelry here. The first thing is that many people tell me in my trainings around the world that they've put a lot of effort and money into their CMMS installation, and it didn't deliver everything that they promised. And you know, if 70% of a group of people say it didn't deliver what was promised, I guess that would be kind of a problem for me. And it's been a problem for me for a long time to get the CMMSs giving you the return that you need. Now, this is not a fault of the systems. It's mostly a fault of what we do with the data and how we treat the systems. even if the system's being used every day to run maintenance, there's little knowledge on how to take advantage of the data collected. So we have megabytes of data being collected in a big operation, hundreds of megabytes or gigabytes, and there's not much knowledge, and we call it tribal knowledge, on what to do with the data and how to use it in a way that will make difference. You know, for example, if we were talking to accountants, there's standard ways to look at the numbers that help the accountant understand what's going on in the business. There should be standard ways of looking at the CMMS data so that people that are experts in the field can know what to do with it. So I wanted to ask some questions of the group. So we'll use this, we'll ask some questions and you'll type in the answers. And the first question is the database viewed as important by top management?
Okay, we're going to go ahead and launch the poll. And again, as Joel has indicated, please just type your answers directly into your keyboard, not into the chat or questions area. And let Joel know, is the CMMS database viewed as important by your top management? All right, it looks like we have 2/3 of the vote in, so we'll give you a few more seconds to cast your vote. And again, your answers are anonymous. We're just trying to get a feel for the group. Okay, looks like everybody has cast their vote. And Joel, what we're finding is about 3/4 of the people, 73%, say yes, the CMMS database is viewed as important, and 27% are saying no, it is not viewed as important by top management. Is that fairly typical, Joel?
Excellent. I think that the first one, the 70%, I think that's an illusion, and I'll talk about why in a minute. But that's very, very telling. Now, the second question is the data in the CMMS used for analysis and subsequent decision-making?
Okay, again, we want your input, so please go ahead and type in your response. Is your CMMS used for analysis and decision-making, or maybe just for managing work? All right, again, we've got about 70% of the votes in, so let's leave it open a few more seconds. Type your answers right in your keyboard. Okay. It looks like we have the votes in. Oh, a couple more. All right, let's go and share them then. So Joel, here we have about 2/3 or 64% of the listeners saying, yes, it is used for analysis and decision making, and 36% or just over 1/3 saying, no, it is not used for analysis.
Great.
All right.
Now, the last question in this series is, and this is the money question for me, is the data ever used directly by the technicians? Now, I don't mean to look up parts or to find sources. I mean to analyze what's going on with a machine. So is the data ever directly used by technicians for analysis?
All right, well, let's find out. So we've just launched the poll question. Do your technicians use the data directly for analysis? Okay, we've got about 75% of the votes in, so let's leave it open a few more seconds. All right, looks like we've received all the votes, so let's share the response here.
Okay.
Okay, so what are we saying here? Sorry about that, but 39%, Joel, have said that,
Yes?
let's see if I can share it, yes, and 61% indicated no. Okay?
Okay, so one of the great uses of the CMMS is to help the people making the decisions on the shop floor to make better decisions. So if you can visualize this, a truck comes in the door to be serviced, and the technician puts the truck number into the database, and it tells the technician all the corrective work that is accumulated that hasn't been done yet. That's the kind of thing that right away improves the efficiency of the shop and improves all the metrics of maintenance. Now, when I look at the training effort, most of the effort goes into which buttons to push to get things to happen. Like, how do I print a work order? How do I update a field? There's also a huge effort that goes into the configuration of the system. So there's, in a system, a large system, there's hundreds of decisions that are made, and a lot of human horsepower, mental horsepower goes into making those decisions effectively, which is great. I mean, no problem. But there's not a lot of effort that goes into the future use at the time it was put in or the present use now of what data is going to be important and what are we going to do with the data, beyond being able to tell how much we spent, fixing a particular machine or questions like that. So there wasn't usually, and I'm very happy to hear of companies that disagree with me on this because it means we're moving forward. But there's not much effort and thought into that future. Now, the reason I said that top management's interest in database was an illusion is because I think about the work orders that I see, and indeed the work orders are the source for all this information. And the work orders that I've seen are things like pump broke and the work order says fixed 3 hours, and that's all it says. That's not enough information to make any kind of decisions. So when I say top management is interested, and I think that that's an illusion, what I'm thinking about is the other data that is collected in the company that the top management really does have an interest in and how they treat it. So if we look at the payroll data, how accurate is the payroll data as far as completeness, accuracy, soundness? Well, the payroll data is usually pretty good. Is the work order data that good? Well, virtually never, because management is not so interested in the work order data as it is in the payroll data because they feel that, that's real money out of their pocket. Now, we have another poll question, and this is from my own information. How many of you have an ongoing training in your CMMS every year? So you've got some kind of ongoing effort to keep people trained in what to fill into the fields and stuff like that.
All right, so we're going to launch our last poll, and let us know, please type in and let us know in your organization if you do have ongoing training on your CMMS as an annual event, or if it's, as many are, just part of the initial implementation. All right, we're about 3/4 of the votes in, so we'll give you a few more seconds. All right, looks like everyone has voted, so let me share those results. And Joe, it looks like 30% say yes, they have ongoing annual training, and the vast majority, or 70%, say no, they do not.
Well, this is really interesting because That number has gone up traditionally. Usually there was fewer in the past. And I think that's an excellent sign that people are taking their CMMSs more seriously. I mean, we know your companies are interested in safety, for example, and safety training is done every year. It's also usually the first thing you talk about at your toolbox meetings. It's usually the first thing you talk about if there's any large group meetings. So we know that safety is important, and this is telling me that the CMMS data is becoming more important if you're continuing to train people in how to fill it out. Now, una más, that means one more. I'm going to say that the biggest, I'm maybe exaggerating, one of the biggest scarcities on the site might be skilled and knowledgeable eyes that can decide what data to look at and how to interpret the results. There's probably only a few people on your site right now that can look at the whole mass of reports that are available to them, pick the report that will give them information, and know what to do with the information that they see. So that's scarcity, because it's not like half the people can do that. It's not like 10% of the people can do that. It's probably even less than that. So let's take a dive into this, and just talk a little bit about it. I'm going to be using some vocabulary. Actionable condition is a condition that you can take action against or you can prevent. So an actionable condition might be a bearing that's not lubricated. That would be something you could take an action. Analysis is looking at the data to find areas of savings or areas to lean up the operation, to make the operation more efficient. And it's, looking at the data, comparing things to each other, and coming up with a roadmap of action based on what you find in the data. The analyst is the person who does that. So again, there's only a few people in most organizations that can really do this well, that they can look at the mass of things and really decide what to do, what to look at, how to look at it, and what to do about it when they find it. Now, a protocol is a set of steps to do an analysis. So if I want to do an analysis, I have a protocol that tells me exactly what to do at each step of the way and exactly what to do with the data and how to look at it. Now, my senior technician, I don't mean like senior citizen technician. I mean the technicians that are at the higher end of the skill level, and they may be younger, they may be older, but they're people at the higher end of the skill level. And the skill I'm talking about is not the skill of maintenance, it's the skill of looking at the information and being able to look at information. So we have 4 steps here. We first maybe, we're walking through the shop and we identify an area for improvement. So maybe the area I want to attack is the amount of hours the people spend doing maintenance work versus the amount of hours they spend doing indirect things. So that might be my area to look for improvement. Or why seals are failing. It could be anything. The second thing we do is we look at what data will we need to see this problem, to look at this problem, and see if the data is stored in the system. I was asked a very simple question by an airport. They wanted to know if the escalators that were most heavily used had the most maintenance problems. Now, this is a very simple problem if you have a CMMS. So you can, you look to see at the number of incidents, and you know which escalators are highly used, the ones that are in direct line with the gates. And it turned out that although they were recording every service call, they didn't record it in enough detail to know whether it was a real service call or like a trip where, a child gets, his jacket caught in the thing and they push the red button, and that requires a technician to come out and unlock it. Those things or a breakdown were recorded the same way, and I actually could not tell them from the data that was in their system whether or not the escalators were breaking down more often or not. Now, the third step is to make a list of the concrete, reproducible steps a senior technician can perform to come to the conclusion that you're looking for. And then the fourth step is the action step, is to actually perform the steps and take the action indicated. Now, we can look at any of these areas for cost-cutting improvements. For example, we may not even be looking at cost-cutting, but for this example, so we might be looking at minimizing direct labor and parts, reducing operating costs, like energy costs, ownership costs. If I have a bunch of leaky compressed air things, holes in my compressed air system, I might need to run 3 or 4 compressors when, if I patch them, I might be able to get by with 2 and not have lower ownership costs. We also can save raw materials, work in process. Management headache is a good one to save, but it's a hard one to put numbers on. And then we can always reduce overhead in particular areas. Now, what I want you to do is, you're sitting here listening to this and looking at these slides. I want you to take out a writing implement, okay? We call them, pens or pencils. Or if you're, a youngin', you'll probably take out some kind of electronic thing. And I want you to pick one area where you have a legitimate question about what's going on in that area, or you see a potential opportunity. And the way I want you to distinguish it is that you feel there's some low-hanging fruit, and I want you to write that area down. Just name the area. So you're writing now. Now, I want you to think about this. This is the top 20 problem types in the last 30 days. And you can see the number 1 type of problem is preventive maintenance. Number 2 is seal element failure, machine jam, seal belt. But look at the difference between number 1 and number 2. So here's my question. Where's the money? Well, the money is in the preventive maintenance. So if I'm looking to have the biggest impact on this system, I would look at what's being wasted in my PM system. And that is an astronomically larger number than everything else. And if we were successful, maybe, we would go from 1.59K to 1.28K. It would still be astronomically larger than seal element failure, but that would be the biggest bang for the buck we could get from this particular set of data. Now, another area for improvement is always going to be revenue enhancement. In a particular plant, the reliability of the plant has a lot to do with the amount of profit it makes, the quality of the output, the production rate or productivity of the plant. All these 3 things are areas which could have enormous impact on the profitability of the entire enterprise. So, here we have sometimes we're not trying to cut, we're just trying to understand what's going on. So this is all the work that's been done, what is the category of the work. Now from the prior data, we know that PM is going to be the overwhelmingly largest amount of work received. But we also have, a decent amount of service work, placement of equipment, transfer of equipment. So these are areas that might respond, and if we could manage them, we might be able to get more minutes of production out of the line. Now, this is a downtime report by machine. Now we see each of these machine numbers, 101, 301, 2000, blah, 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 for the last 90 days. So here's my question for you. And assuming you're not colorblind and you can see the colors, what color has the greatest opportunity to reduce downtime? Now we don't know that. It could be that, some of these are easier than others. I'm sure they are. But if we would put this in order by size, we would find that 1002 is overwhelmingly larger than everything else. And 1011 and 1041 are nice chunks also. So if we were going to do a project using this data, we'd go to 02, 11, or 41, and maybe one or two others are up there. But these are the places where it's easiest to gain a nice chunk by doing little work. See, if you attack one of the small ones like 1028, 1029, 1031, you could reduce that by half and it still wouldn't be much of a reduction. So I want you to pick up your pencil again and write down an area of revenue enhancement that looks like, just your gut feeling is that it might have an opportunity for you to look at. So you're writing. And what you have now are two areas or two questions. Just it could just be a gut feeling that there's something going on there, or it could be something more than that. Now, everything I say is going to be, we have to preempt it or say ahead of time that we've got a gopher game going. Now, the gopher game is a game where you manage one maintenance cost. And, if you've ever been to this, there's this torture palace called Chuck E. Cheese. It's a torture palace for the parents of the children who want to have their birthdays there. I remember this vaguely from when my children were little, this place called Chuck E. Cheese. But they had this game called the Gopher Game, and it was a field of holes. And you had a mallet in your hand, and when the gopher would stick his head up, you'd have to whack it on the head. And then as the game progressed, the gopher would get faster and faster, and then finally there'd be 2 or 3 or 4 gophers, and you'd be struggling to hit them all on the head. Now, when we cut a maintenance cost, we run the risk of having the gopher stick its head up somewhere else worse. So I could cut my maintenance costs by not servicing my boilers. That's a real savings, except that the gopher would be energy costs because the heat exchange would deteriorate. So I hit one gopher, but then I have even a bigger gopher, sticking its head up. So the thing I want you to be aware of whenever you're playing with this is always look over your shoulder for unintended consequences. Any change you make runs the risk of an unintended consequence, and it's sometimes extremely embarrassing to solve one problem and to have completely out of left field, something worse happen. So let's look at protocols. What exact data would you need to analyze the situation in the target area you chose? Now, the second thing is, how would the data be presented so that the senior technician could see an action path? So I'm trying to do two things here. I want to use the analyst to figure out what the data would need and how it would need to look. And then I want to present it so that the senior technician can actually do the analysis themselves without the analyst. Now, I learned about this when I was in the hospital with a kid that had a broken arm. And I didn't know much about x-rays and stuff. And the issue with x-rays is that it has to be positioned. The arm had to be positioned exactly right to be able to see the views, to see the break. And if you twisted the arm, you wouldn't see it correctly. The doctor wouldn't see it correctly. Now, the people who position the arm are not doctors. These are x-ray techs that, spend a year in training, as opposed to 12 years. And what they have is a book. And the book tells them if the doctor says rule out broken arm on the script, then they know exactly how to position the arm on the plate so that the doctor will get to see exactly the views that they need to see. Now, the physicist tells the person, given the thickness of the kid's arm, if you have a linebacker, for the Chargers and their arm is broken, or you got, a 9-year-old kid with their arm broken, you need a lot more radiation to get through the thick arm than the thin arm. And the physicist is the one who knows how to do that. So the doctor writes a protocol that says position arms like this, and the physicist says if it's 1 inch thick, set the machine at so many kVA. If it's 2 inches, 10 inches thick, set it at a different kVA. All that's in a book, and the x-ray tech can just follow what's in the book and they'll get a good x-ray. Now they're trained, obviously too, but they don't need to know medicine, much medicine, to take a good x-ray. They don't need to know much physics to take a good x-ray. So that's the beauty of a protocol, is that it's designed by somebody with very high skills for somebody with moderately lower skills to be able to get to a particular outcome. Now, protocols are only useful if they actually happen. So, if we can have all the great ideas in the world, if it doesn't happen, it doesn't make any difference. Good actions based on data it may not be the only way, but it's the primary way to generate a return on investment from your CMMS. So you get this protocol set up so it looks at a certain particular thing, and then you make decisions based on that, and that's where the ROI comes from, return on investment. And you can use your PM system to generate a reminder. If we think about PM is just a big scheduling system. Some parameter causes the thing to pop out at some time, and it doesn't matter what pops out. And when you could pop out, run XYZ protocol, that could be what pops out. Now, the protocol has to be specific, concrete, and actionable, and explicitly stepped out. In other words, each stage of what you have to do is written clearly. It's preset and pre-designed, so if there's a query that has to happen, the query's been designed and it's already there, and you push the button to execute the query. There should be limits or action points. So you may, part of the protocol is to put in the limit dates. but the rest of the query is already designed and ready. And it should be automatic. You shouldn't have to do a lot of work to get this thing to work. Now, you have to write this out as specifically as you can. You have two areas, and what I'm hoping is after this discussion is over, you take 10 minutes and look at the two areas and say, what data do I need to analyze this area, and where is the data? If it's in the CMMS, think about how you would structure a protocol, what steps would have to happen so that anybody could go through the steps and come up with the result. And when they got the result, they would know what they had to do to then report to you, hey, listen, you know, we have an excessive amount of downtime on machine number 1002. We're going to get a little team together and look at, you know, do a Pareto analysis of the whatever, you know, of the data to see what's the biggest ones, what are the biggest problems that are happening. Now, once you have that, you have the analysis to be performed, you have the specific step, and make sure you design it so that it can be done by a technician. You don't want to design it so you need a computer programmer. The whole point of this is to get analysis, push it down in the organization. Your technicians are making hundreds of decisions a day in some cases. Each decision is a $100 to a $10,000 decision, and they're basically making it without any guidance from the system. I'll say that again. Every work order represents a couple of decisions that were made by the technician about what to do, how deep to go. That was based on their experience and not based on data in any way, shape, or form. So what we're trying to do is to push analysis to the people as close to the front line as we possibly can, because once they start doing this, this is also going to solve one of your other problems, and that is that they'll naturally start to collect better data than they are now. And then, you know, we have to train the technicians how to go through the protocol. It's not enough to come out with a document and hand it to somebody. It's completely not enough to do that. And I see that happen is that, you know, the brilliant engineer type that does this comes out with what they think is the last word in description, and they give it to a technician that has no idea what they're looking at. So we would have to go over it and then let them run the protocol with us there, and as they have questions, we incorporate the questions into the protocol. And the result is I want my senior technicians to do the interpretation that is now being done by the maintenance manager, and then coming back to the leadership group and saying, here's what the data says, here's what we were doing or did. So that's the discussion I wanted to have with you. I want to thank you very much for your attention. And if anybody has any questions, my contact information is there. If anybody has any questions right now, I'm happy to listen and share with you what I can.
Great. Well, thank you, Joel. And again, we'll be here and try to answer as many questions as we can. So for our listeners out there, please go ahead and type them right into the questions feature, and then I'll pose them to Joel. And Joel, one question that came in during your presentation, you talked about, you showed the slide which showed the preventive maintenance being such a large percentage of what we all work on. And this listener is asking, how do you put a dollar amount on how much you saved in implementing a PM system? You know, very much, there's obviously an investment in implementing a PM system. What are some ideas for quantifying the savings without getting gophers to pop their heads up? Or was it whack-a-moles? I can't remember. But
you know, I think it is whack-a-moles. Okay, the question, this is it's an important question, and I'm going to answer it, but the big answer is beyond the scope of this conversation. What we normally do is we look at what it would cost to run the equipment without any preventive maintenance at all. And we look at what the cost of that is and what the downtime cost is, what the scrap that would produce cost is, and all those costs, we put them together. And then we relate that to the cost of doing the PM services, the materials, the labor. Also, there's still going to be some breakdowns, you know, that are not related to PM, that are random events. We put that in, and then we put in all the corrective maintenance that we would do, that the PM, you know, the PM inspector writes up corrective work orders for scheduling and execution. All that stuff, we put that together, and we put it in a balance, and the cost of running it without PM, including downtime and everything, should be quite a bit more than the cost of running with PM. And we say usually that the cost of PM should be no more than 70% of the cost of running without PM. So you should have a 30% savings, or it's not worth it because of the accuracy of this. I don't know if I just made it worse by that kind of answer, but that's the way we justify a PM program.
Gotcha. And Joe, you also talked about how it's so important to have details, you know, really detailed information in order to be able to analyze the results. Can you share a few of the pieces of information that you've seen in your experience that are really important to collect?
Yeah. Okay. There's two questions that you want to be able to answer when you pick up any work order, any corrective or breakdown or any kind of work order like that. And the two questions are, what were the conditions found when the technician got there? What did they actually find after they did their diagnosis? They have a finding. What's the finding? The second thing is, what did the technician do about what they found? Those two questions must be answerable with what they wrote. Now, in addition, I also want, obviously, the parts that were used, the time, you know, those kind of things for sure. But without knowing the scope of work, I can't do any analysis from that.
Gotcha. Okay, and Joe, we had several people asking about receiving a copy of today's presentation. So I did want to interject that we will be sending out an email with a link to the recording, and those who wish to get a copy of the presentation, we'll have a survey at the end. Just indicate that you'd like to receive a copy, and Joe will send a PDF along with an article that goes into some more details. Joe, you also mentioned about wasted PMs. In your experience, what are some examples of PMs that were considered wasted versus necessary?
Well, Rona, are you from the Philadelphia area originally?
From Brooklyn.
Oh, Brooklyn, okay. So you might not know this. There's a famous store in Philadelphia called John Wanamaker's Department Store.
Oh, Wanamaker's. It's now Macy's. It's right.
Right. Macy's bought them. But John Wanamaker was a breakthrough merchandiser. And he said something about advertising which relates to your question. And what he said about advertising was he knew that more than half of his advertising was a complete waste of money. Okay, he knew that. He said he just didn't know which half. Okay, now,
Me too.
what that has to do with PM is we know that 75% of the PM effort that we expend is wasted because we have no findings. And if we're like inspecting something, for example, and we inspect it 6 times and there's no findings, and we inspect it the 7th time and we get some findings, the 6 times, like if we could have just inspected it the 7th time, we would have been fine. But we can't do that because we don't know exactly when stuff is going to happen. So PM, because of that unknowability, is extremely, some people are extremely overly cautious, and they touch the equipment a lot to make sure they don't miss something. Now, that itself is a problem. Every time you touch a piece of equipment, and this is very, very true with electronics, it's also true with mechanical, but it's really true with electrical or instrumentation. Every time you touch the piece of equipment, you run the probability, however small, of messing it up. So you touch the piece of equipment, and there's some chance that it'll be worse off when you're done. So we want to be very careful about over-PMing because we can actually lower the reliability of the system by touching it too often. So I find when we look at people's PMs, it's usually extremely, and I like to say fat, as opposed to lean, because they're usually touching the equipment too often, and there's more effective ways to do that than what they're doing. The other thing is that the PM tasks themselves are not well directed towards how the asset actually fails.
Gotcha. Okay, yes, I think I do recall we did a session with you, Joel, on lean work orders in which you talked about the key pieces of information that were important to track. Joel, you talked about the annual training where it seemed that very few of our listeners were engaged in annual CMMS training. What types of, when you've gone out and done this type of training, what types of, who's generally involved, and what are some of the topics that you train on when you're looking at years 2, 3, 4 beyond the initial implementation?
Yeah, the first thing, I don't usually do that kind of training. I usually prove the need for it, and then I like to see it done by inside power users of whatever system they're using. So this is something that is really an in-house thing, and what what I recommend people do is run an audit of the work orders. So what I mean by that is take 50 randomly selected closed work orders and then look at each of the critical fields, you know, the service that's been requested, the requester, the asset number, all the different fields, and mark each of the fields whether it's adequate or not. And usually you'll find that, like, the work requested field is usually not adequate. What was done and what was found is not adequate. Closing comments generally don't tell you what the scope of work was, all that. So then once I know where my deficiencies are, I go through the work orders and scan the ones that are particularly nice, that are done properly, And I also scan the ones that are particularly nasty, where stuff is not filled out, and then design the training around that. So it's real training. It's not, theoretical stuff. It's based on the data that's actually happening.
Great. Well, that sounds like a really great place to start, and it sounds like you've given a few really good follow-up assignments to our listeners, being able to pull out an audit of work orders and start to look for the patterns, what's being done well, where the information is lacking. And Joel, how much when you start, if people now do start to collect this additional detail and start to set up protocols, how long or how much data do you generally find, what's a realistic expectation when you're going to have enough data to really be able to start to perform analysis and make decisions upon it?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know. I've never really thought about the answer to that as in how much data, but certainly if your work orders are pretty good, you're going to have some actionable stuff to do by the end of the first year. I mean, if you just look at I just took a few reports from eMaint, and even like a 30-day report gives me something something that could be actionable. The downtime over the last 90 days. As long as you're relatively confident that the data is reasonably accurate. About accuracy, let me give you one metric that I like to do quickly, like quick and dirty metric. What I do is take a sum of all the work order hours for a month, and compare them to the payroll hours after I deduct indirect, like vacations and people sick and stuff. The reported hours should be relatively close to the payroll hours if the system is catching all the hours. So that's something that'll tell you right away whether or not you're getting everything.
That's a good starting point. Okay, great. And you're right. I guess there's a good place to start is to just start running the reports and looking at the data. And it's an iterative process.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I think we're just about the top of the hour. So again, I'd like to thank everybody, and especially thank Joel for taking time out of his evening to share some of his insights and experience in all his years of doing this training. And thank all of you who are on the line this morning or this afternoon. And I hope you've taken good notes and you'll act on a few of the assignments that Joel suggested that we do as follow-up. And again, we will be sharing an email with a link to the recording. There'll be a survey at the end of this session. We really like your feedback and your suggestions on some other topics so that these presentations are really meaningful to you. You have Joel's information up on the screen, and I invite you to reach out to Joel directly as well and continue the dialogue. And some of you that had specific questions, I'll follow up after the session as well. If there are specific questions about eMaint, we will follow along. So thank you again for your time, and thank you, Joel. And it's always a pleasure. And we'll see you all.
Thank you very much,
webinar. And any questions of me, reach out to marketing at eMaint. And thank you, everybody, for your participation. Have a good day.